Hey, all you literary legends and luminaries. I'm Julie, and welcome to another episode of Booksmart. Today's book is a memoir called Blood Orange Night, My Journey to the Edge of Madness by Melissa Bond. Let me start by saying I don't read too many addiction memoirs. Being at the receiving end of someone else's addiction, I'm a little prickly when it comes to addicts and the treatment and our attitude towards the family of addicts. But the reason I picked up Bond's Blood Orange Night was because I thought it would be more about her symptoms, what led her to the doctor and how prescription drugs are overprescribed and the doctors prescribing them know little about what these drugs actually do to us long term. And while the book did address those issues, I still found myself getting a little prickly at times as she described her lengthy path to recovery. Although this isn't a typical addiction memoir, Bond's body is chemically dependent on the prescribed drugs, and she doesn't engage in addictive patterns of behaviors. So here's the gist of the book. Bond has her first baby and develops crippling insomnia. She goes to the doctor who first prescribes Ambien. When that only works for a little while, she goes to another doctor, Dr. Amazing, who prescribes Ativan, which is better known as lorazepam. She takes such benzodiazepines exactly as prescribed by her doctor, who continues to up her dose. While at first she finds relief from her symptoms, the drugs create their own horrific set of side effects. Unbeknownst to Bond, she can't even quit the drugs, especially cold turkey, because to do so might kill her. After being on the drugs for roughly a year and a half, it takes her about the same amount of time to try to get off the drugs. So, to start, Bond captures her insomnia well. I've been there and it's awful. Bond's son has Down syndrome, and thanks to the recession, she loses her magazine job. Stress upon stress, not to mention that being a first-time mother is in itself exhausting and overwhelming. My insomnia exploded when my son was going on 1. It's this horrible cyclic thinking of panicking about not sleeping, and I just cringe thinking about it. Bond takes Ambien, and at first all is good. Not just Ambien, but she takes Benadryl with it at the suggestion of her doctor as a booster to the Ambien. Is it really a good idea to take Benadryl every single night? And she's pregnant with her second baby. I'm just cringing as I read it, but let me interject with my own experience here. My doctor gave me Ambien too. I don't like to take anything. I'm one of those obnoxious people that read the side effects on ibuprofen, and I argue with my doctor about what kind of antibiotics they're trying to give me. But I was desperate, so the doctor gave me a free sample. Maybe it wasn't Ambien, but that commercial with the purple butterfly, Lunesta maybe, I don't know. In any case, she warned me not to even take a bath after I took the pill because I could fall asleep in the tub and drown. So I take the pill and I crawl into bed. I laid awake for almost an hour. Now, I will admit that once I fell asleep, I stayed asleep all night, but struggled to get out of bed the next morning. I was foggy and drowsy, and I remember falling face first on my bed at like 6 p.m., and I thought, this is not worth it. I felt crappy all day. When I told my doctor that, she was still insistent upon me taking it, said I had to get used to it, but maybe start with half a pill. I never took it again. What I'm getting at is that my insomnia, and I think this was true for Bond with the way she wrote about it, was a symptom of anxiety and stress more than anything. So shouldn't we treat that instead? Because by treating the anxiety and or the stress, won't we then treat the insomnia? And I'm not talking about throwing an anti-anxiety pill at us either, but actually addressing what the problem is. And this is the part that I think Bond could have addressed more thoroughly throughout the book. She really wants her audience to understand the dangers of these drugs that our doctors throw at us, yet she doesn't fully address that issue. For instance, when the Ambien stops working and she still can't sleep, she tells us that no one could figure out why. But those were the scenes with her doctors I wanted her to actually write and show. I want to know what the doctor said and how they behaved. Instead, Bond gives us many scenes that don't always add to the story. Stuff about her husband and her son that don't always push the story forward. Since the Ambien wasn't working, Bond goes to Dr. Amazing. I'm not sure why she doesn't name him. Certainly he couldn't sue her if she has her medical records as proof. I don't know. But Dr. Amazing prescribes Ativan and then ups her dose when it loses its effectiveness. Here's the part of the story I feel Bond doesn't hammer into her reader as much as she could. Lorazepam, if you watch The White Lotus, this is the drug the dopey mom was taking, should only be used short term, like 2 weeks tops. Same with Valium and Xanax. These are not drugs that should be taken long term, yet we all know people take these drugs daily because that's how doctors prescribe them. While Bond brings this up a few times, she doesn't really stop and focus on it. She spends a lot of space in the book developing scenes that I don't know if they need as much developing. I've never read the word buttery or butter used so many times as an adjective and not related to food. Yes, Bond has a beautiful way of writing. You can see her poetic writing experience, especially when she describes colors, but by page 100 it becomes distracting, like very distracting. Bond's side effects from the drugs get worse and worse. So here's a scene when her legs collapse while she's holding her new baby. And while it's beautifully written, you'll see what I mean by all the color references and whatnot, and it kind of references the title. Is this what dying feels like? Well, will Sean find me in the morning, cold to the touch, and milky froth slipping out of my mouth? The roar rises and fades. Heat runs like a fierce howling wind up my back. I don't know where my body begins or ends. Colors explode in my vision, raging like a wildfire through my head. The blood orange night turns red and screams through my eyes. The room tilts around me. Consciousness shuts again. Velveteen black. Silence. Time stretches and disappears. A dark figure hovers at the doorway watching me. I can feel the dark like a cold fabric wafting. I can feel death wait and then turn. Hiss. And then there's nothing. A long time of nothing. The darkness peels away. I lie listening for sound. It's impossible to gauge how much time has passed. Chloe has stopped crying. When did she stop crying? The red and orange and heat are gone. I try moving my arms and it's like dragging them through mud. I reach forward and hoist a leg underneath me before collapsing. Strands of carpet beneath my fingers. Fibers in my mouth. I hoist a leg again, willing my body to move. I slump, carpet scratching my face, my arm. Wait, raise the arm, heft the leg, angle it, push it. There's no ability to formulate a question about what happened. There's no capacity to think of getting help, to think of calling for an ambulance. A part of my brain has turned off. I'm feral, an animal on her belly. I can register only one thing. I must move. After several attempts, I'm on all fours. I begin crawling. So, terrifying, absolutely terrifying experience. But with the way Bond writes, sometimes it doesn't always fit the scene. I think it did that one. But does that make sense? It messes with the pacing of the story, too. Some conversations could have been cut, especially when she's complaining about her husband or some woman she runs into at the grocery store, while others, especially those with her doctors, get summarized. And she complains about things that I don't know if they deserve it. She casts her husband into this very cold and distant person who doesn't give her enough support while everyone else around her seems to rally to her aid. She's very privileged, having relatives come live with them to help with the kids, and then she even sleeps at neighbors' houses while she weans herself off the drugs. I didn't quite understand that setup and why she didn't sleep at home, but whatever. And it's interesting that she did find ways to combat the symptoms. Walking, for instance. And I've got to read you this because I thought, oh my gosh, somebody else figured out the secret too. So Sean and I go to a cheesy sports bar after therapy. We go out on the patio because the televisions that move in every corner feel like they're crawling over my body. The lights are bright. The image is gross and sharp and fast. I know this hypersensitivity is part of the detox. I'm okay with it. I've got the formula. I know how to deal with the withdrawal symptoms when they come on. Rage, walk your ass off. Anxiety, walk your ass off. Nausea, walk your ass off. Then sleep and eat as much as you can manage. Yes, walking. This is so fascinating because this is how I dealt with my anxiety, especially when my son was about 1 year old. Walk and walk some more. Yet no one ever told me movement was a productive and effective way to deal with stress and anxiety. Doctors just want to throw toxic drugs at you with potentially harmful side effects, yet no one told me the power of just walking and moving. And this is not a criticism of Bond. I'm not holding her accountable for her doctor's actions, but this is a part of the story I don't understand. When she first goes to Dr. Amazing, she asks whether she has fatal familial insomnia. I haven't even heard of this, but Bond has established herself as a researcher, that she is trying to find the answer and the solution to her insomnia since she can't find relief from anything else and it appears that the doctors can't help her and have no idea what's happening. So when Dr. Amazing prescribes Ativan and even says it's safe while nursing, Bond doesn't do her own checking on it. Dr. Amazing gives her a lot of babblecocky about cortisol and pregnancy. Now, I know I'm neurotic and I don't trust doctors when they throw medicine at me, especially a new doctor who has known me for all of 2 minutes. But because Bond came up with fatal familial insomnia, I'm surprised she didn't do any research of her own, especially when Ativan, like the Ambien, only works at first, and then Dr. Amazing keeps upping her dose. I don't know, with so much information at our fingertips nowadays and with drugs for absolutely everything, drugs we are prescribed long term, I'm just surprised more people don't do their own research, especially when the drugs don't do what they promised. She doesn't find out the horror of dependency and potential death until she's been on the drugs for over a year. Another part that was interesting was when Bond started writing again and presented her poems again to a crowd. She was well enough to do that. I'm not criticizing here. What I'm looking at is how our mental state of mind impacts us physically. When you're in the throes of motherhood, when one day repeats itself over and over again, and trust me, I have been there, it can look bleak no matter how delightful our children are, no matter how precious that time with them is. You need an identity outside of mother. I think that was adding to her distress and her physical symptoms of withdrawal. This is yet another aspect we don't address when we are discussing depression and anxiety, how those disorders develop physical symptoms and then it becomes this vicious cycle. But we don't talk about this aspect at all. Bond sort of recognizes how therapeutic her writing was, about how getting out and doing something for her was so powerful, but she just doesn't stay there long enough for me. One of the best things Bond brings up that I don't think I've read anywhere else is that these side effects to drugs, they mimic conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, or even the nebulous fibromyalgia, or maybe even think it's MS. We then seek to test and treat for these new conditions as opposed to looking at the side effects of all the prescription drugs a patient is taking and that might be the cause. These developing symptoms aren't a new condition that needs to be treated, but a side effect of the current long-term prescription that is being used. Think about that, yet we just keep prescribing more and more drugs. This was an issue I really wish Bond would have spent more space developing, because I don't think anyone really has done that. So here's the overall purpose of Bond's book. And it's kind of way crammed at the end as she kind of goes through her story chronologically. So she meets this woman at the grocery store. I'm left standing alone in the aisle, which seems to stretch for miles in either direction. I feel vacant and furious. I feel sick at her inability, at our culture's inability to see that we're making bombs with our drugs. These bombs go off in the brain, and the medical community has little real knowledge of what happens. Drugs go through the FDA with a wink as the trials that fail are filed away. This yoga woman saw me and saw the face of addiction as narrated by our culture. She had no knowledge of anything else. I wonder how many of these people in the store are taking benzodiazepines. And of those who are, how many have laughed about it, made jokes about their chill pills, their Xanny bars, and party candy, without having any idea that these same pills can slowly dysregulate the brain. How many could imagine that their emerging digestive problems, muscle aches, unexplained increases in anxiety or insomnia were a result of the drugs they were taking? How many got diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, or a host of slippery neurological disorders? How many were prescribed pills and more pills to combat these ghost ailments? This is the big secret I want to scream in this woman's face. These pills are dismantling people slowly, so slowly they imagine it's anything but their happy pills. Bingo! That is a powerful paragraph, and no need to add colors or buttery to it. And here's just a side note. With all these people worried about vaccines, how many of these same people are popping prescription drugs daily for long-term use? Funny how there isn't a conversation or a movement about that. There's no anti-prescription drug movement happening. Food for thought. So close your ears if you don't want to hear a spoiler. Bond doesn't completely get off the drugs, and some of her symptoms are a bit misleading. She was born with a heart condition that she didn't know about that caused a couple of small strokes to happen. Bond makes no connection that her use of benzodiazepines complicated that condition. That first part I read to you when her legs just quit working, the doctors think that was her first stroke, not a side effect of the Ativan. So should you read Blood Orange Night? Despite my misgivings and prickly approach to addiction memoirs, yes, you need to read Blood Orange Night. The prevalent use of benzodiazepines alone makes Bond's book a must-read. Ask yourself, are we treating the symptoms or the underlying condition? Even though Bond sometimes takes a circuitous route of getting to her point, you need to read it for a fuller understanding of our nation's reliance on prescription drugs. Thanks for watching. As always, my goal at Booksmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.